knowledge sourced from ancient Egypt, and other keys such as the tarot, sacred geometry, the Fibonacci sequence, alchemy, hermetics, mythology, and biblical scripture. We can now begin to put these fragments of knowledge and symbolism together and finally have an understanding of what has been hidden from us. With this understanding, we can unlock what was left to us by our very knowledgeable and wise forefathers. Unfortunately, this truth of our divinity was taken from us with violence and torture and hoarded in the strongholds of the Antichrist establishment, otherwise known as the Vatican. But don't be naive in thinking this information would also not be known by the Freemasons and the elite families and royalty. They took this knowledge for themselves and sold us a lie of death and hell. The Crusades were nothing more than an excuse to pillage and plunder all civilizations of this knowledge, so it could be kept for themselves at the expense of the masses, who they enslaved into bondage to serve only them. They murdered almost 1 million Cathars and stole all their scriptures and most sacred holy texts. They called them heretics and sentenced them to the most painful deaths. Now all we have left are remnants of these ancient texts that survived destruction. The rest was stolen by the Antichrist Catholics to be put together in a twisted version of scripture, which they then used to lull the herd into a false belief of themselves and the reality in which they exist. Their agenda is to keep us in bondage to the physical plane, so we cannot move into our ethereal body, and they do this by giving us a perception of limit and lack about ourselves. We are told that we are beings that are finite and that we will die, and we either go to heaven if we are on our knees to them, or we go to hell to burn in eternity. However, worse still, some have now gone down the even more foolish path of thinking there is no higher God consciousness and they are not accountable for anything they do. The truth is, we are all immortal, but as with everything, it comes at a price. We must be worthy of that immortality, and we have accountability for our gift of life, as that is how the universe sees our expression of soul. The truth is, we really do need to be a good soul and have lived an honest life with good intent towards all fellow man and creatures. Then your immortality will be assured. For those that view this as acts of a vengeful God do not understand the laws of nature, because for nature to continue to expand and thrive in perfection, only the best will ever remain in existence. It is just the law of the universe and nothing personal, and we see it play out around us in the physical environment every day in nature. This is also the same for souls and our consciousness. We have to understand that everything always plays out on multiple levels, and our souls are subject to the same laws as all existence. In Hermetics, these different levels are described as the 3 great planes. They are the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. They are not so much even to be seen as distinctly separate either. They more or less merge into each other, but it is basically helpful to view reality as being layered and always playing out on these different levels in the macrocosm and in the microcosm. But this understanding of accountability is nothing new, for we see this also in the ancient Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony, where the heart is weighed against the feather of truth. The feather actually represents Orion and the godlight that illuminates the hearts of men. It is no coincidence that we hear this judgment theme repeated across culture. This is because indeed we experience a cosmic event in which our reality is shifted and we are judged. Once a soul is judged worthy of being bestowed with highest consciousness, they are rewarded with immortality on a newly rebirthed earth at the height of consciousness to complete this infinite cycle of the soul once again. This is why all these great civilizations, such as ancient Egypt, Sumeria, Angkor Wat, ancient Greece, the Aztecs and Mayans, all sprung up from nowhere. And for those that think such a shift in reality would not be possible, even your own scientists have discovered this truth in quantum physics, though Hermetics knew of this law thousands of years ago, and it is called the law of vibration and is one of the 7 hermetic principles of the universe. But we will talk more about this later. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is incorrect. We live in cycles within cycles, and all exist in rhythms of higher and lower, in and out, just like the tide. So we can understand this also happens within the consciousness of the collective souls. We can also see this explained in the Hermetic principle of rhythm. This cycle happens infinitely. There is no starting point that we expand only forward from, as in Darwin's theory. Each and every soul exists at 0 point, with the universe extending out from them in both the macrocosm and the microcosm. What Darwin's theory actually did was keep us bound to the physical plane once again. And once again, this is due to an agenda they have to keep us seeing reality in a certain perspective. However, this is part of a cycle we go through in our descent of consciousness. We begin the cycle in Zep Tepi, as the ancient Egyptians called it, which translates to first time, at the height of consciousness, as all the great civilizations around our planet did, only to descend once again into a time when humanity forgets its divinity and becomes broken and corrupt, full of empty souls who have forgotten who they are. This is the time we now live in, but soon we are about to begin that new cycle once again. The Maya actually were right, but just got the timing a bit off. But that is to be expected when you are orally handing down information over thousands and thousands of years. But the Maya knew it was about the sun changing, and the Hopi mythology also says this. And we must also remember, when we are so focused on times and dates, that the Maya and scripture say the exact time will not be known. Even so, the new energies are streaming in, and all but the unconscious can feel them. And know they are intensifying. Mother Earth is also reacting to this new energy. Her grids are firing up again as she adjusts and readies herself. She is also giving us clear messages to pay attention to our surroundings and our environment. We can only trust our instincts in these times. This new cycle began last year on the transit of Venus. We even saw the Queen take full advantage of this new energy, holding her 60th Jubilee right on the beginning of the transit. During that transit, Venus gave birth to a new cycle on the Sun, and it is important to note that Venus is also the timekeeper for the Maya, and they watch the movement of Venus intently. So this last transit of a 26,000-year precessional cycle is very important. If we look to mythology, we can equate this event to Isis giving birth to Horus, or the Virgin Mary giving birth to Jesus. The new sun Horus was birthed on the Venus transit last year, and so began a battle between Horus, the new cycle on the sun, and the old and corrupted sun Seth, that oversaw a corrupted and broken civilization, as told in the ancient Egyptian mythology. And the ancient Egyptian mythology tells of the battle ending with Osiris rewarding Horus as the victor. This is symbolic of the new light of Orion being transmuted through the new young sun Horus, also symbolic of baby Jesus. However, we have to understand that Jesus and Christ have multiple layers symbolically, and it is the Christ light that returns to the divine male twin soul that gives the name Jesus and Christ a connection with the Son. This is why we see such reverence for the Son of God, because it is the Christ light that illuminates within the divine male, who is the Ark of the Covenant. The Lamb of God is God returning a part of himself to the divine male soul. The divine female twin soul is the embodiment of the moon, and she is more connected to the ethereal. She is represented by Isis, but Isis also has aspects of Venus, especially when Horus is connected with her. The divine female soul is the Holy Grail, and she receives her knowledge directly from God. The scriptures and mythology are all telling the same story, and that is that it is both the divine male and female twin souls that must bring forth divine knowledge together. This is because this knowledge originates in the ethereal realm of the divine, and as such, males and females are equal in both skills and intellect. So it is clear now why we are seeing biblical events unfolding around the planet and intense cosmic and celestial changes upon us. That light from Orion is returning to illuminate us once again, so we can once again access divine knowledge in a time of higher consciousness. We see this returning consciousness also present in the awakening we are experiencing as a collective. Even though the numbers are not large, there is a definite expansion happening nevertheless. Each soul is remembering their divinity by order of their birthing onto the physical plane. This, as with everything in the universe, is done following the Fibonacci sequence. The first souls that are birthed through are called divine, as they hold the strongest memory of their divinity and the divine knowledge within them. But with each subsequent soul that births through, this memory is diluted to finally, when we have an imbalance of souls populating this planet, we get the majority with very little memory of who they really are. With this expansion of consciousness returning, what we are seeing in fact is us remembering the truth of our divinity that was once lost to us. We are beginning to remember who we are and the truth of our existence. In the following videos, we will use this uncovered knowledge and the other keys available to us, as well as numerology and symbols, to reveal what has been hidden about our true divinity and what information can be revealed amongst all the symbolism in religious art, alchemical and hermetic drawings, and even authentic crop circles. What they are hiding from us is that we are birthed as souls that split into male and female upon manifestation from God's consciousness onto the material realm. We are all immortal twin souls that were birthed onto this physical realm from the consciousness of our God located in the Orion Nebula. Our God consciousness is known by many names: Osiris, Odin, Vishnu, God, and more. But every ancient civilization around the world knew the importance of the Orion Nebula and our God, for he shapes our reality. This is where a solid understanding of hermetics is required if you are to fully fathom this information. If we go back to where I mentioned reality shifting and quantum physics, confirming this could indeed be a possibility, as we are all just particles created from waveforms. This is where we need to have an understanding for the law of the mental universe, for it is then we understand that reality is made up of particles all held together in waveforms due to the thought projection of the mental universe. The best way to visualize this is how we see sand particles move into different geometric shapes on a board depending on what resonance is used, as in cymatics. When this understanding is applied to the hermetic law of the mental universe, we understand that the mental projection is resonance and light projected in waveform from the galactic core through the mind's eye of Orion, and finally brings us into existence on the material realm through the transmutation of energy of the sun and the moon. The sun is the projection of God consciousness, and the moon is the birther of souls, and the souls are birthed through the navel energy center. Edgar Cayce also confirms this and calls this energy center the Leiden. But it is not only the Orion Nebula that is a consciousness in our galaxy. Each of the other nebula are also a consciousness, and each manifesting a reality and souls onto a realm otherwise known as a planet. In our mental universe, using the energies of the sun and the moon, as well as the influences of the other planets, we are manifested onto the physical plane. But due to the earth always being in shadow half the time, there is another plane that exists on this realm, and that is the ethereal plane. Throughout this cycle as souls, we move between both planes, manifest in the physical form, and when we die a physical death, our soul moves into the ethereal plane to be rebirthed once again in the physical. However, in our truest form, we are ethereal, and we manifest into different containers, so to speak. This cycle of reincarnation happens over a 26,000-year cycle, until we are at the end of the cycle and the galactic core Atum once again gives us a pulse of illumination. Atum is infinite God energy with no consciousness. This is what all the nebula within the galaxy access to create souls and our reality, and this is where souls are returned if they do not pass judgment. Now that we understand the correct meanings of the numbers and symbolism, we see that the truth that has been once hidden from us can now be revealed. If we continue to follow the trail of scattered pieces left to us, we can reclaim our divinity once again. But for us to know our divinity, we must also know thyself. As the ancient Egyptian proverb tells us, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and whosoever shall know himself shall find it. And this is because we are all ethereal beings, but we have forgotten this. So before we can unlock and understand the meanings within all the symbolism, we must first know who we are. This is where the key of the tarot, along with the newly uncovered knowledge from ancient Egypt, help us to reveal the truth that has been hidden for so long. To begin to know ourselves, we must once again think to the Fibonacci sequence and remember that everything expands and grows using this sequence along with sacred geometry. When we use this universal sequence of numbers and the golden mean spiral, along with the tarot, we begin to see this hidden information revealed. Everything in our universe births, expands, and grows using this blueprint. When we look further into the golden mean spiral, we can see it is divided into sections. When we correspond these golden mean sections to the major arcana in the tarot, we begin to understand the evolution of our souls and our true divinity. However, before we start down the path of the tarot and begin to unravel their secrets, let's first get a bit of history to this key that has been left to us. The tarot's original author is unknown. It is also uncertain as to exactly where and when the tarot came into existence. But it is believed that it originated in ancient Egypt about 3,500 years ago and was brought to Europe by the Rom or Gypsies as they travelled to Europe from India. Due to the increasing religious intolerance of the Antichrist Catholics and their attempts to suppress esoteric knowledge and sacred truths from humanity, the Magi who were in possession of this sacred knowledge were forced to encrypt these secrets into the tarot cards to keep this ancient wisdom safe from manipulation and destruction. The tarot was devised using the principles of the Kabbalah, but we can also see symbolism from ancient Egypt, the runes, astrology, and numerology. And they also equate to the chakras and color symbolism. The tarot consists of a deck of 78 cards in total. This is made up of 22 major arcana cards numbered from 0 to 21, and the minor arcana consist of 56 cards. However, it is the major arcana cards that we will focus on to help us decode this hidden information. So now we have an understanding of the importance of the tarot, and that they are not just some novelty for telling fortunes, as we have been led to believe. So let's now look at the first card. The first card is the 0 card, and not only does the 0 card represent the beginning of the major arcana in the tarot, but it is also the first number of the Fibonacci sequence. This card number 0 equates to the Fool and represents Orion, the location for the God consciousness of our material realm. We can see this also in the Visconti tarot cards that surfaced around the 15th century. On this card, you can see a clear depiction of Orion with his club and feathers in his hair. We see that the Rider-Waite tarot card also shows the Fool with a feather in his cap. And if we look at ancient constellation maps, we see that Orion is depicted with a club and once again feathers in his cap. These feathers, as with the feather that is placed on the scale to be weighed against the heart in the ancient Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony, are symbolic of the godlight of Orion. Some feathers, like peacock and duck feathers, display their color with a process called structural coloring instead of pigment. Structural coloring is where the cellular structure of the feather or as with the shells of scarab beetles, are actually formed in a way where they refract wavelengths of light to create their color. So once again, we see this connection to changing angles of light also contained within this symbolism. This is where the term feather in your cap originates from. This term was used to describe a great achievement or special honor. And of course, for those whose hearts are equal in weight to the feather, that is a great achievement and special honor indeed, for they are rewarded with the highest consciousness in Zep Tepi, or Aru, the field of reeds, as the ancient Egyptians described their Garden of Eden. We must pay attention to some of these old sayings, as they are actually remnants of truths that have managed to survive. Now, when we look to the Kabbalah tree of life, we see that the very top Sephirot is also connected to Orion and the Fool card. This Sephirot is called Kether, which means crown. It is also interpreted as both the topmost and regal crown. Just like the crown chakra, it sits above the head and is not a part of the body. And this is also why it is known as the crown, because a crown is worn above the head. The symbol of the crown is also seen in many alchemical drawings of the male and female twin souls, and is symbolic of the reuniting with God consciousness, and thus being crowned. This is why royalty wears crowns, as they are emanating this crowning of God consciousness. However, they are nothing but mere frauds that took the opportunity to enslave the masses and crown themselves. All of the other Sephirot below the crown are likened to the body, which starts with the head, depicted by Chokmah and Binah, with Daleth symbolic of the third eye chakra directly located in the middle. The third eye is also related to the pineal gland, if we are to take the perspective of this area in the physical and not the ethereal body. Daleth is also called the door, or the door of the tent, and is symbolic for this energy point being the gateway to God consciousness, which is located at the crown. If we look to Hindu mythology, we see that they saw the third eye chakra as a gateway, for they believed that the spiritual energy from the external environments could enter their body through this gateway, and hence they take the utmost precaution in protecting it with spiritually positive protecting forces. From this point in the Kabbalah tree, it descends downwards until it reaches the root chakra that equates to Malkuth. But the symbolism on the Fool card is not only symbolic of Orion, our God consciousness. It is also symbolizing the potential soul before it has been birthed into existence and splits into twin souls of male and female. Once again, if we look to Kether on the Kabbalah tree of life, it represents the primal stirrings of intent in the Ein Sof. Ein Sof in Kabbalah means God prior to his self-manifestation. And this is because God manifests a part of himself within the souls that are birthed onto the material realm. It is also said that Kether is so sublime, it is called in the Zohar the most hidden of all hidden things, and is completely incomprehensible to man. This is once again speaking of God, for what else but God can be so incomprehensible to man? On the card we see the Fool is being depicted in the ethereal, walking towards the cliff's edge in innocence, completely unaware that he is about to be manifest onto the material realm below. In his pack, he is holding the unknown potential of the souls. We see this is also connected to Kether in that it contains all the potential for content, though it contains no content itself, and is therefore called nothing. And we know the number 0 also equates to nothing. The soul's purity is also symbolized by the white flower, At this point, as the number 0 and Kether symbolizes, they are still only just a potential in God's consciousness, for they are not yet manifest. The white sun is symbolic of the galactic core, Atum, and the dog is representing Sirius, or Canis Majoris, which is also called the dog star. In ancient times, the season following the star's appearance came to be known as the dog days of summer, and coins retrieved from the island of Chios in the Aegean Sea from the 3rd century BC feature dogs or stars with emanating rays highlighting Sirius's importance. Orion's belt also points to the brightest star in the sky, and that star is Sirius. Orion's belt and Sirius also line up with significant locations of ancient sites around the world. We see this with the Hopi Mesas that lines up with Orion's belt, and then we see Sirius correlating to the Chaco Canyon. In Mexico City, the Street of the Dead lines up with Orion's belt, and Sirius correlates to the largest pyramid complex in the world, Cholula, the Great Pyramid of the Sun. In Egypt, we see that Orion's belt lines up with the 3 pyramids of Giza, and Sirius lines up to Heliopolis, which is one of the oldest cities in Egypt, and also known as the City of the Sun. So we can see that Orion and Sirius are definitely related to each other and have an important connection. So it is not surprising we see the symbol for Sirius in the form of a white dog on the Fool card. In the other symbolism of the card, we see the ice and the sun, symbolic of the polarity of God's infinite energy. For energy is always equal in polarity of positive and negative. That is what gives energy its force and momentum. So now that we understand what the Fool card is really representing, we will now look at the male and female twin souls once they have manifest into existence. Now that we have covered the Fool card and have gained an understanding for the true symbolism within this card and its connection to Orion, our God consciousness, let us move on to the next 2 cards. For these are the cards that give us the first glimpses into the truth of who we really are. And that truth is, we are much more than our physical containers. We are ethereal beings first and foremost. The following 2 cards are card number 1, the Magician, and card number 2, the High Priestess. Now, if we look to the Fibonacci sequence, and as explained in the previous video, is what all growth and expansion in the universe is based upon, we can see how these 2 cards relate to the following 2 numbers in this sequence, which are 1 plus 1. When we look where these 2 numbers are located in the golden mean spiral, we see that although they are separate, they are still contained together in the first golden mean section. This is symbolic of the soul birthed into existence from the consciousness of God, represented by 0, and splitting into male and female upon its manifestation into existence. The ancient Egyptians refer to this in their texts as when he was 1 became 3. If we also look at the red line within the golden mean spiral, we see it begins at the corner of this first golden mean section, containing these 2 numbers. Also note that the line touches only 3 sides of the first section, showing us the first representation of the Trinity, which is symbolic of God and the male and female divine twin souls. Now we understand where these 2 cards correlate to in the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean spiral. Let us look at these cards and the information encoded within them in more detail. As mentioned before, the first card is the Magician, and this card is symbolic for the divine male twin soul in the ethereal form. At this stage, the divine male soul, as with the divine female soul, still only exist in the ethereal state and have not yet burst onto the physical plane. The Magician stands behind his table with his tools that are symbolic for the skills and abilities he has at his disposal. For in the ethereal form we have access to much more power and knowledge as we are closer to the divine. Above his head is the infinity symbol, showing he is immortal, And there are also 8 red roses at the very top, symbolizing God's infinite energy. For not only is 8 symbolic of the immortal soul, but also infinite God energy. And it is no coincidence that the number 8, when turned sideways, represents infinity. For many numbers are not just relaying a numerical value, they are also a symbol within themselves. We see that the magician's left hand is held up towards God. He is holding a scroll which represents the Torah and is symbolic of divine knowledge. His other hand points down to the ground, showing that he brings this knowledge with him to be manifest onto the physical plane below. The word Torah comes from the Hebrew root yara, which means the mark or the law of God. Notice, however, the Torah scroll is unopened, for this is symbolizing that although he has this knowledge within him, he has no real understanding of it, for it is the divine female twin soul, the high priestess, who has the understanding for this divine knowledge. And we see this symbolized by the Torah that now sits open on her lap. Before we look into the other symbols shown within these 2 cards, let us first get a clear understanding of how the divine male and female twin souls must work together to unlock the divine knowledge within them, and how we see this shown repeatedly in mythology across culture. In the Kabbalah Tree of Life, we now know that the first Sephirot, Kether, represents Orion and God consciousness. So now we see the following 2 Sephirot are called Chokmah, which equates to wisdom, and Binah to understanding. Chokmah is representing the magician, and Binah represents the high priestess. This is also why we see the positive energy force related to Chokmah, male, and the negative energy force to Binah, female, as these are the characteristics of energy connected to the male and female. However, it is at this point I must stress that positive and negative energy do not equate to gender. The attributes of energy are just one aspect within gender. Unfortunately, many fall into this simplistic understanding of gender and use it as just another label, equating it only to left and right brain hemispheres or positive-negative energy. And it is unfortunate to see many who never move beyond this simplistic understanding. Now when we translate this to Christian mythology, we see that Jesus is symbolic for the divine male twin soul, and as the magician shows us, he is the receptacle of divine knowledge, and as such, he is the Ark of the Covenant. When we look to the Gnostics, we see that they revered Mary Magdalene as a teacher and called her the Holy Grail. We often see Jesus referred to as the Son of God, and this is because the divine male soul has a part of God's divine knowledge within him. This is also why he is called the Lamb of God, for this is representing a part of God being brought back to the divine male when the light of Orion, God consciousness, returns, and he has access once more to the divine knowledge he holds within him. So now we understand why the Gnostics revered Mary Magdalene and called her the Holy Grail, for she is the key that has the ability to unlock this divine knowledge from the Ark of the Covenant, who is the divine male twin soul. However, as mentioned before, this is a theme that we will see repeated across culture in other mythology as well. Let us first look to the Norse mythology. And here we see it is Odin, who is not only symbolic of Orion and God consciousness, but also the divine male twin soul. The story goes that Odin, symbolic in this instance for the divine male twin soul, hangs from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced in the side by his own spear. This is seen also with Jesus, who is pierced in the side with a spear when he hangs from the cross. And in Mark 15, verse 33, it states, "And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour." So we see again the number 9 is mentioned in both accounts of Odin and Jesus. The number 9 is the number of the divine. It is the Trinity within the Trinity, like a fractal within a fractal. It is symbolic of the male and female divine souls reuniting with God consciousness, and shows each holds a part of the divine within them as well as each other. This is symbolized by the snake around the waist of the magician in the shape of a circle, representing the female twin soul. and the outstretched snake that sits behind the pillars and curtain of the high priestess card is symbolic of the phallus and the male soul. The circle and rod, which are symbolic for the male and female, are repeatedly seen represented in symbolism across cultures. For more understanding of this, we can also look to the yin-yang symbol that shows the male and female twin soul, each with a part of the other within them. Yin-yang is not representing energy as we have been led to believe, for energy must be absolute in its polarity. What this ancient symbol is representing are the twin souls. So let us return to Odin, who hung from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights. After this time, he is given divine knowledge by way of the runes, but it is said that it is Freya, his consort, the embodiment of the divine female twin soul, that teaches Odin the magic and knowledge of the runes. However, even when we look to Odin in his representation of Orion and God consciousness, we see that he has 2 ravens called Hugin and Munin. In Old Norse, Hugin means thought and Munin means memory or mind. So here we see that Hugin represents the divine female soul's ability to understand or have thought, and Munin, representing memory or mind, is symbolic of the divine wisdom held within the male soul. It is said that Odin sends these ravens out at sunrise to fly all over the world and bring information back to him at sunset. And although he fears that Hugin, thought, may not return, it is Munin, memory, that he fears for the most. And this is because, as we will see when we visit the card of the Emperor, it is the physical attributes of the male twin soul that are more connected to the foundational characteristics, whereas the female twin soul has more of a connection to the ethereal. Due to these foundational attributes of the male twin soul, as we descend into lower consciousness, they are the first to lose the memory of their divinity. And when consciousness returns, their ability to remember their divinity takes longer to return. We see this also in the Zohar with Lilith leaving the garden in disgust because Adam no longer sees her as his equal. Once again, this is representing the male twin soul's descent into lower consciousness and his loss of memory in regards to his divinity. However, in regards to Norse mythology, it is also interesting to note that the Norse people say that their mythology is not actually speaking of past events, but is in fact prophecy. But it does not end with Norse mythology, for if we look between the many layers of Hindu mythology, we can see the god Shiva and his consort Shakti once again symbolize the divine male and female twin souls in their ethereal form. In this depiction of Shiva and Shakti, we can see that the light of Vishnu, who symbolizes the God consciousness of Orion, is shown shining down onto Shiva's head and then transferred from his hand into a receptacle called a lingam. The lingam is a container and correlates to the Ark of the Covenant. The word lingam is Sanskrit for mark, and if we remember, the Torah is also Hebrew for mark. Shiva's consort Shakti's equivalent of the lingam is the yoni, and due to it being a receptacle for the lingam, it is often mistaken to be symbolic of the female genitals. However, as with the lingam being equated to a phallic symbol, there is no mention of this being the case in any Hindu texts. Like with the divine male twin soul Shiva, there are many different aspects to the divine female twin soul Shakti, represented by other goddesses within the Hindu mythology. The goddess associated with the characteristics of knowledge within Shakti is Saraswati, who represents knowledge, music, art, and science. Saraswati is the wife of Vishnu. Once again, we remember Vishnu being symbolic for God consciousness and Orion. So we see the direct connection of divine knowledge and the divine female twin soul. Vishnu, however, also has other aspects depicted by different gods, and the aspect symbolic for the creation of souls from God consciousness is symbolized by Brahma, and it is said that it was with Saraswati's knowledge that Brahma created the universe. Again, we see that it is the divine female twin soul that has the understanding of divine knowledge. So it is not surprising that religious establishments had an agenda to remove her completely to any connection of knowledge and intellect, and instead made her only symbolic of reproduction. Finally, we can look to Sumerian mythology, and we see it as the god Tammuz and the goddess Ishtar, who are symbolic for the divine male and female twin souls in the ethereal form. Tammuz was known as the faithful or true sun, and we see again this equating of the Son of God to the divine male twin soul. Interestingly, Tammuz is also a Jewish day related to Moses and divine knowledge. The goddess Ishtar, symbolic for the divine female twin soul, was said to have brought the gift of arts, speech, reading and writing to humans. However, it is said that these gifts were kept away from the primitive humans, showing that divine knowledge is only accessible in a time of higher consciousness, when the light of Orion once again returns to us. It is also said that these gifts were not Ishtar's to give, but in fact she had to receive them from her father Enki first. Enki represents Orion, God consciousness. So again we see that it is the divine female twin soul that has an understanding for divine knowledge, while it is the divine male twin soul that carries it within him as the Son of God. So it seems that by universal design that no one being, male or female, has complete access to divine knowledge. Therefore, no one being has complete power. And we see this reflected in Plato's philosophical text called the Symposium, where he writes, "According to Greek mythology, humans were originally created with 4 arms, 4 legs, and a head with 2 faces. Fearing their power, Zeus split them in 2 separate beings, condemning them to spend their lives in search for their other halves. So now we have a thorough understanding for the roles of each divine twin soul in regards to accessing divine knowledge. We can begin to look further into the rest of the symbolism within the Magician and High Priestess tarot cards in the next video." Now that we have a thorough understanding for the roles of the divine male and female twin souls in regards to accessing divine knowledge from each other, let us look into the other symbolism within these cards and find what other information they hold for us. First, let us return to the Magician, who is symbolic for the divine male twin soul in the ethereal form. Both the Magician and High Priestess cards are showing the divine male and female twin souls have not yet manifest into their physical state. They still only exist in their ethereal form. We see the Magician wears a red cape, and this red material is symbolic for the divine male twin soul. And if we look to the High Priestess, she is wearing blue. We will often see these red and blue coloured garments representing the divine male or female twin souls depicted in religious paintings. The divine twin souls are often shown wearing these red and blue garments. However, sometimes they are worn on another person to represent the divine twin souls, or even as just material floating or resting nearby. However, whenever the symbols of red and blue cloth are depicted in a painting, they are representing the divine twin souls. The Magician stands behind a square table, symbolizing that even in the ethereal form, he is more connected to the foundational characteristics, and this is because he has more of a connection to our sun, the manifester of the physical plane. Now let us look to the High Priestess card in more detail. We see that she sits on a throne with the opened Torah on her lap, and as discussed in the last video, this is symbolic for her ability to make coherent and rational sense of divine knowledge, which the Torah represents. The curtain behind her symbolizes the veil between the physical and ethereal planes, and she is positioned in front of it, showing she has more of a connection to the ethereal plane, and due to this, she is also more connected to the divine. In Michelangelo's painting called The Creation of Adam, we see God's arm is around the divine female twin soul, who in this instance is being represented by Lilith. This is symbolic for the divine female twin soul being closer to God and the divine. We can also see the red and blue cloth, symbolic of the divine male and female twin souls, being depicted within this painting. However, this connection to the divine is also represented in the 8 pomegranates shown on the curtain. 8 is symbolic for the immortality of the divine female twin soul. And when we look deeper into the symbolic meaning of the pomegranates, we find they are also connected to God consciousness and Orion. Let us first look to where they are mentioned in 1 Kings 7, verses 13 to 22. These verses tell of the pomegranates depicted on the 2 pillars standing at the entrance of King Solomon's temple, which represents God consciousness. These are the same pillars also depicted on the high priestess card, which stand for Yachin and Boaz. These 2 pillars are representing the gateway to the God consciousness of Orion, and this gateway can only be accessed through the heart, for the gates only open to those who are deemed worthy of immortality. If we look to verse number 20, it says, "The capitals of both pillars, above the bowl-shaped part next to the network, were the 200 pomegranates in rows all around." Now, if we look to the number keys we have from ancient Egypt, 20 is shown to us as one of the numbers connected to the heart. However, you will also note that the number 8 is related to the heart too, as is the sun. And we see a cross is also depicted on the chest of the high priestess. This is also showing the connection of the sun and the heart. It is also interesting to note that the heart of a human fetus beats for the first time on the 20th day. There is also a connection between the 200 pomegranates on the 2 pillars and the sun, for there were 200 days from the Venus transit on the 5th of June in 2012 to the December 21st solstice. As discussed in the first video, this is when Horus, the new sun, was birthed. The high priestess also wears the headdress of Isis, who is also symbolic of Venus. And we can see that in the paintings where Mary is depicted with the pomegranate, she is holding Jesus as a child. The pomegranate and the divine female twin soul are also mentioned in another verse in the Bible, with this quote from the Song of Solomon 4:3. "Thy lips are like a thread of scarlet, and thy speech is comely. Thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate within thy locks." We can clearly see that he is speaking of the divine female twin soul. And if we look to Lilith and Mary Magdalene, who are symbolic of the divine female soul, there is mention always made of their beautiful long hair. And the verse 4:3 equals 7, which also equates to the ethereal form. There is also a strong connection to the divine female twin soul and God consciousness in Orion within the Greek and Roman mythology regarding the goddess Hera, who is directly related to Zeus, being one of his 3 sisters. In Greek mythology, it is Zeus who is symbolic of Orion and God consciousness. Hera is often portrayed with the pomegranate in her hand, and the cow, lion, and peacock are also sacred to her. So once again here with Hera, we see the female twin soul and a connection to the peacock, symbolic of the changing light, bringing in higher consciousness and with it divine knowledge. However, with the mythology of Hera, there is a direct connection to Orion. For in the Orion story, Hera cast Pomegranate Side, an ancient city of Antalya, into dim Erebus for daring to rival Hera's beauty. This is speaking of the waxing and waning of consciousness and the access to divine knowledge within the divine female twin soul that comes with the new light from Orion. There is also a connection to the pomegranate and divine knowledge in the Jewish tradition, for the pomegranate is seen as a symbol for righteousness And it is said that the 613 seeds of the pomegranate correspond to the 613 mitzvot, or commandments of the Torah. Even today, many Torah scrolls are stored when not in use with a pair of hollow silver pomegranates placed over the two upper scroll handles. So we can see there is a clear connection within this symbolism with the pomegranates, divine knowledge, and the divine female twin soul. Finally, at the foot of the divine female twin soul, we see the crescent moon is being represented. And again, this is because it is the moon that governs the ethereal plane and births the souls onto the physical realm. Hence, the moon is shown at her foot, close to the ground. And as with everything birthed into existence, this is done with the female energy. And as such, this is also symbolized within the moon shown here on the High Priestess card. We should also note the number on this card and the way it is depicted, which are in Roman numerals. If we look at this number symbolically, it can also represent the number 11. Again, if we look to the number key we have from ancient Egypt, the number 11 is the number connected to the moon and the navel chakra. And as mentioned in the first video, Edgar Cayce stated the soul burst into the physical container through the Leiden energy point, which was located at the navel area. And we also see this in the inscription of the great high priest of ancient Egypt called Nepaneteru, which says, "The West seeks to hide from him who follows his heart. The heart is a god, the stomach is its shrine." So we see there is a connection to the High Priestess, the moon, and the birthing of souls to the navel energy point, and the symbolic representation of the number 2 on this card also confirms this once again. So now we have had a look at the symbolism locked into the Magician and High Priestess cards in relation to the ethereal form of the male and female twin souls. In the next video, we will look to what their physical attributes will be before they are birthed onto the material plane. Now that we understand the symbolism within the Magician and High Priestess cards, we know we are first and foremost ethereal beings who merely spend time birthed into our physical containers onto the material realm. We experience our incarnations on this realm between the two manifested planes for a period of 26,000 years, which is one precessional cycle. As with all things that exist in our universe, everything is a microcosm and macrocosm of the other, a fractal within a fractal. And as Hermetics tells us, this manifests on all the planes, physical, spiritual, and mental. However, the cycle we experience as physical beings incarnating on the physical plane is a smaller microcosm to the cycle of our ethereal self existing on the ethereal plane. This is why some may look at the time frame of 26,000 years as quite a large period of time, and that is because it is being viewed from a physical perspective. However, if you look at it from an ethereal perspective, 26,000 years is not such a long time. And just as our physical bodies go through the cycle of death and resurrection, so does our ethereal self. However, the rebirth of the soul is based upon what is written in one's heart, for the returning light will illuminate the good within each soul. In the ancient Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony, the heart was to be as light as a feather. However, in this instance, light does not just equate to weight, but also the light of Osiris, Orion. As we saw in the previous video regarding the Fool card, the feather is symbolic for Orion, God consciousness, and also the changing angles of light. We are birthed from God consciousness in our true state of being, in our ethereal form. And as shown in the Fibonacci sequence and golden mean, we then split into male and female upon creation. Now that we have been manifest from God's mind, we are bestowed with physical attributes representing the container in which our ethereal being will be birthed into. These attributes are symbolized by the cards number 3, the Empress, and 4, the Emperor. So let us now look into what the symbolism reveals in these two cards about the male and female divine twin souls. Let us first start with looking at where these two cards are placed on the Fibonacci sequence and golden mean spiral. We can see the first twin soul to manifest with the physical attributes is the Empress card, which is card number 3 and represents the divine female twin soul who is first to manifest with physical attributes due to her female creation energy on the physical plane. However, this is also because the twin souls are mirrors to each other, and we will often see this represented in the religious depictions of them also. So the order in which they are manifested into their physical forms is the mirror to the order they were created in the ethereal. Let us now look at how these cards relate to the numbers within the golden mean spiral and Fibonacci sequence. We can see the divine female twin soul equates to the number 2, and the Emperor is now connected to the number 3. However, if we look at the golden mean section where the Emperor is placed, it encompasses all the other sections, and due to it equating to the number 3 within the Fibonacci sequence, this is representing the Trinity held within this whole golden mean section. So not only do we see the 3 being depicted in the Empress Tarot card connecting her to the Divine Trinity, we now see it connected to the Emperor due to his placement within the sequence. So with the Empress equating to a 2 on the Fibonacci sequence and then correlating that to the number keys from ancient Egypt, the number 2 relates to 20 and the heart. And we also see the white heart clearly represented on the Empress card. This is symbolic of her connection with the divine and her ethereal self through the good intentions of a pure heart. With the Emperor being connected to the number 3 in the Fibonacci sequence, if we look to the number keys we have from ancient Egypt, this number connects him to the navel chakra. The energy aspects within this chakra, when related to the number 3 instead of 11, are more connected to the sun. And there is a very strong connection to the sun and this chakra, and this is why it is also called the solar plexus. If we look to the Hindu texts, this energy point at the navel is called the Manipura. And according to the Hindu tradition, this chakra is the 3rd primary chakra and is called the City of Jewels. The Manipura symbol for this chakra is depicted by a downward pointing red triangle. The area inside of the triangle is called the fire region, and the yellow circle in which it is situated is showing a connection to the sun energy. And as the triangle is pointing down, this is showing this energy is manifest below onto the earthly plane within the male twin soul. This triangle is also representing the Trinity birthed onto the physical plane, for within every soul is a part of the other as well as the divine. The 10 petals are showing the infinite cycle of the souls, rebirthed into the physical bodies and reuniting with God consciousness, as 10 is an infinite number, for if you divide it by the Trinity, you will get an infinite number, 3.3333 to infinity. We can see the number 10 is also represented in the Kabbalah Tree of Life diagrams by alchemists Kircher and Robert Flood, who show 10 spikes or rays at the top and bottom of the Tree of Life to indicate that this cycle of birth and rebirth of the soul is infinite. The Hindu texts also relate the fire region within the triangle to the god Vani, who is shining red with 4 arms and is seated on a ram. So we see a connection to the god Vani, the ram, and this chakra, and the ram's head's on the Emperor card. We also see that the god Vani has 4 arms, and let us not forget that even though the Emperor is in the number 3 position in the Fibonacci sequence, he is still also a number 4 in the tarot. The stone chair he sits upon is also representing a square, which also equates to the number 4 and symbolizes the foundational and earthly instinctive attributes he brings down with him. As mentioned previously, these foundational attributes are also the reason why the male soul is the first to forget his divinity as we move into a time of lower consciousness within the cycle. Once the memory of their true self is lost, they use their foundational attributes to take power and take control over the physical on the material plane. However, this is a result of the waning light of consciousness, so should not be viewed as evil or negative. It is just a part of the cycle of consciousness we exist in. The seed mantra for this chakra is the syllable Ram, and within the bindu or dot above this mantra resides the god Rudra, and he is sometimes described as red or white with 3 eyes and a beard. Rudra is one of the names used for the god Shiva, so we can see a direct connection to Rudra and Shiva, the divine male twin soul in the ethereal form. So we see that Rudra represents the foundational and physical aspects of Shiva and embodies the unpredictable and destructive earthly elements within the male twin soul. However, Rudra was also a healer, so we see these renewing forces are also present within these foundational characteristics of the divine male twin soul. Rudra is also said to be the early form of Shiva. This is symbolic of the divine male soul evolving from his physical form into his ethereal self, represented by Shiva. Now let us look to what the emperor holds in his hand. We see in his left hand he is symbolizing the male and female with the Ankh, with both the circle and rod being depicted. His immortality is also symbolized within the Ankh, as it was symbolic for the key of eternal life. The orb in his right hand is known as the globus crucica and was said to show one who had complete dominion over all. In ancient times, the orbs were held by priests as a symbol of the sun and its power. However, the real truth has been obscured, and the orb is actually symbolic for the receptacle of the divine knowledge he holds within him. This orb has had many changes in the way it has been depicted throughout the ages. However, we can see in this very early depiction of the Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa, dated 1188, that he holds the symbol of the orb as a circle and cross, and below it is a book, indicating knowledge being brought down to the physical plane from the higher consciousness in the light of Orion, transmuted through the sun. We also see in this painting by Leonardo da Vinci that the orb is clear, representing that the Holy Spirit that brings in higher consciousness is not definable. The 5 gems on his crown show that his divinity is in his destiny, for the number 5 relates to the agreement or covenant with the divine made by the soul. For the soul's potential is known to itself and God consciousness before it is manifest onto the physical plane. In James 1:12 it states, "Blessed is the man that endures trial, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to them that love him." We also see this Bible verse is 1:12, which equates to the number 4. Once again, the Emperor Tarot card is a number 4. Now let us look to the Empress card in more detail. Firstly, we see that the earthly plane is not shown as rugged and harsh as it was on the Emperor card. And this is because the divine female soul has a natural connection to the higher energies of Mother Earth, symbolized by the 7 tree peaks. For the number 7 is connected to the ethereal and higher states of being. The 8 pearls on her necklace are symbolic of her immortality. She has 11 stars on her crown, and this is showing the connection to the creation aspect within her on the material plane, as 11 is connected to the manifesting of souls onto the physical plane. She also holds her scepter higher, again showing her connection to the ethereal. The scepter is also representing the rod and the male twin soul, and the circle at the end of the pillow is symbolic of the ring and the female twin soul. We also see at the top of her scepter there is the same orb that was on the Emperor card, symbolic of the divine knowledge he holds within him. The illumination of divine knowledge within the female twin soul is symbolized by the pomegranates on her gown. These were depicted on the curtain in the previous card, the High Priestess, but now she wears them on her garment. These pomegranates are showing the female twin soul's understanding of the Torah and the divine knowledge which it represents. She also sits upon a white hart, showing again she is close to the divine, and we see the symbol for Venus is shown within the heart. Aphrodite is a goddess connected to Venus, and her other symbols are the dove and the pomegranate. The dove is symbolic of Venus bringing in the light of God consciousness, and we can see this is represented with the dove in religious paintings, showing the Holy Spirit or light that brings with it the illumination of divine knowledge. Aphrodite's symbols also included wheat, and we can see wheat is depicted at the bottom of the Empress card. In Christian mythology, wheat was symbolic for the children of truth. And in Matthew 13:24, Jesus said, "The good seed, the wheat, are the children of the kingdom, the product of truth, which the sower had sowed." On the ancient Egyptian number keys, we see that 13 is at the crown chakra and represents the death of the physical container to reunite with God consciousness. 2 plus 4 is 6, and 6 represents the physical form. This is showing truth is the seed one needs to sow to return to God consciousness from the physical form. And again in this verse, Psalms 55, "The wheat are the true church, gathered with the sickle of truth. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice." 5 and 5 are symbolic of the agreement or covenant with the divine made by the twin souls before they are manifest onto the physical plane. And 5 plus 5 equals 10, which is symbolic of them honoring this covenant and living in truth, being their key to this infinite cycle and their immortality. So now we have unlocked the symbolism within these two cards. Let us move on to the next card, the Hierophant. Now that we have an understanding for the creation and evolution of the twin souls in regards to their ethereal and physical forms, let us look at the next card, the Hierophant. At this time, the male and female twin souls have still not manifest onto the physical plane. For before they make this final transition from the ethereal to the material realm, they must first understand their covenant with the divine. This is symbolic of the Hierophant card, which is equated to the ethereal conscious force between the divine twin souls and God consciousness. For they cannot reunite with this divine consciousness again until the cycle is completed. It is at this time their destinies become known to them, as the gift of immortal life comes with a responsibility to keep on a path of truth. Once this information is bestowed upon the divine twin souls, they are now free to decide whether they continue and be manifest onto the material plane or return to Atum. We also need to understand that this transitional stage doesn't result from discussions and conversations. This is done on an ethereal and conscious level, and as such, this understanding is something that is inherent within each soul and the divine. Unfortunately, it is at this stage of the soul's evolution that the religious establishment, seeking to gain full control of the masses, inserted themselves into the role of the Hierophant, making the masses believe it was only through the church, popes, and priests that you could uphold your covenant with God. In truth, there is no human that can stand between you and the divine, because each soul has their own personal connection, for we all carry a part of the divine within us. We are all an extension of the divine, and everything we have ever done throughout all our incarnations is recorded in our hearts and experienced by God consciousness. This is what the Eye of Ra symbolizes, the all-seeing eye of God that measures the heart on the return of the light or Holy Spirit of God consciousness. So there is a covenant each soul makes with the divine and its twin that is known consciously by this soul prior to manifesting onto the physical plane. At the end of the cycle, all of the deeds within the heart of every soul is illuminated and weighed against the feather of truth, which we now know is symbolic of this divine conscious light from Orion. And it is only the souls that have upheld their covenant and lived as good souls that are rewarded with immortality. This is why the heart is so important in all the cultures, mythologies, and scriptures. For what is written in the heart cannot be hidden from the light, and each heart will be weighed.
So let us once again return to the golden mean spiral and Fibonacci sequence to see where the Hierophant card number 5 is situated. And we see that it is at number 5 on the Fibonacci sequence and golden mean spiral. Again, we can also see this section of the golden mean spiral encompasses all the other sections, and this is symbolic for the covenant between the divine twin souls and God before they manifest onto the physical plane. If we add the numbers of the Fibonacci sequence up until this section, we get 12. The number 12 is symbolic of the twin souls who are not yet reunited with God consciousness. We can also look at the number 5 in its symbolic form and see that the Roman numeral 1s that were on the High Priestess card are now joined together at the bottom. This is representing the connection between the twin souls as they are about to be manifest onto the physical plane. The High Priestess card is also symbolically connected to the Hierophant, for it is the female creation force that births everything into existence, including the twin souls. We can also see this relayed in ancient Egyptian and Sumerian mythologies, as it is Isis who resurrects Osiris, and Semiramis who resurrects Nimrod, and the goddess Nut that creates all. We see the symbolic connection of these numbers also on the Justice card, which is number 11. This card is symbolic for the covenant on our return back to God consciousness, for at this stage the discernment of our covenant determines whether we pass beyond those pillars back to our divinity. If we look to the Kabbalah tree of life, the Hierophant card equates to the very mysterious and misunderstood Sephirot Death. Death is like Kether, and they are both symbolic of the ethereal and conscious forces outside of the ethereal physical form represented by the other Sephirot. Death is situated between the throat and third eye chakra, representing a conscious and ethereal force between the soul and divine consciousness. In Kabbalah, death is said to represent a third conscious intellect. This is symbolic for the conscious ethereal force between the divine and the consciousness of the souls. Death is placed directly in the middle of the four Sephirots, Chokmah, Binah, Chesed, and Gevorah. These Sephirot are symbolic of the ethereal and physical forms of the male and female twin souls. Just as we saw the tarot and Fibonacci numbers depicting the mirrored creation sequence of the twin souls from ethereal to physical, we also see this shown in the tree of life with the positions of these four Sephirot. So we have the magician represented as Chokmah, the high priestess Binah, the empress is Chesed, and the emperor is connected to Gevorah. Chesed is symbolic for the attributes within the physical manifestation of the divine female twin soul of love and kindness. And Gevorah encompasses the physical qualities of the emperor and is symbolic for strength, power, and judgment. We also see that death lies directly beneath Kether, and it is said in some Kabbalah texts to be a reflection of Kether. Death is also situated directly in the middle of Tifereth, the heart, and Kether, God consciousness. However, this also includes Daleth, which represents the mind and is connected to the third eye chakra. The path on which death is situated is known as Gimel or Camel and represents the connection from the heart to the divine, but shows that there is a third elemental consciousness that we must pass beyond, which is represented by death. Death is also situated between the throat and third eye chakra, as it is symbolic of the expressed agreement of our covenant between the divine and our twin soul. The path of Gimel shows us that we must pass beyond death and have upheld this covenant to be bestowed with immortality and crowned at Kether. It is the light within our hearts that grants us access beyond the pillars of Solomon's temple to reunite with the divine. We can also see the path of Gimel or camel reflected in this old saying. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. Gimel is also the 13th path, and on the number keys from ancient Egypt, the number 13 is also directly related to the third eye and crown chakra, for this is symbolic of the death of the physical container upon reuniting with God consciousness. So again, we see the path to the crown is directly related to the heart. And once again, on the ancient Egyptian number key, we can see that the number 8, which is symbolic for immortality, is connected to not only the heart chakra, but also the third eye and crown chakra. However, we will visit this further when we look into the Death Tarot card in future videos. In this verse from Psalms 119:17, it even mentions the word Gimel. It states, Gimel, deal bountifully with thy servant, that I may live and keep thy word. The numbers of this verse are also significant, as we see it relates to 11 and 8. 11 being symbolic of the twin souls manifest into their physical body, and 8 equating to their immortality. Again, we can also see this covenant between the twin souls and the divine clearly shown in 2 Kings 23:3 with, and the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all their heart and all their soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people joined in to the covenant. The king is symbolic of the divine male twin soul, and we see the verse mentions with all their heart. This is relating to the covenant between God and both the divine male and female twin souls. However, it also mentions, and all the people joined into the covenant. This is symbolic of every soul thereafter making a covenant with the divine. If we look at the numbers of this verse, we see it is 23:3. 2 and 3 equal 5. This is directly connected to the Hierophant Tarot card number 5, but also the Fibonacci sequence and golden mean spiral. And the 3 is representing the Trinity bound by this covenant. As discussed earlier, the Hierophant is related to death on the Kabbalah tree of life. However, the Hierophant also has a connection to the path of the serpent, as it represents the throat chakra on the tree of life. According to the Hindu tradition, the throat chakra is the 5th primary chakra and called the Vishhara or Vishhari. So again, we see a connection between the number 5 with this chakra and the Hierophant card. The mantra or seed sound for this syllable is called Ham. It is interesting to note that some religious belief systems have an aversion to ham or pork. Could this be a strong symbolic gesture enacted as a way to ensure their memory of this covenant was kept? In the bindu or point above the mantra resides the deity Sadashiva, who has 5 faces and 10 arms. Again, we see the connection to 5. And we also have 10, which represents both covenants of the twin souls and the infinite cycle of death and resurrection. The throat chakra is also symbolic of the energetic force we use to express our souls onto the material plane. This expression emanates from what is brought together from our heart and mind, thinking and feeling in unison. Together our feelings and thoughts are expressed at this energy point to be manifest onto the physical plane. The throat chakra is where we speak our truth and our lies. The immortality of our souls is determined by this expression of our soul and our connections with others on the material plane through cause and effect. Cause and effect is also a principle of hermetics. This is the end of part 1 of number 6 in the Mystery Teachings series. In part 2, we will gain more of an understanding of the principle of cause and effect which governs our lives and how this is related to the Hierophant card and our destiny. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. This is the sixth Hermetic principle of cause and effect. So there is no such thing as chance. Your destiny is applied to you to test your soul and see if you are worthy of your immortality. And this is a covenant and agreement each soul accepted. We see this application of cause and effect to our existence also related in the Colburn Bible, where it states, "Destiny may be likened to a man who must travel to a distant city, whether or not he wishes to make the journey, the destination being his destiny. He may choose whether to go by way of a river or by way of a plain, whether across mountains or through forests, on foot or horseback, slow or fast, and whatever befalls because of this decision is fate. If a tree falls on him because he chose the forest path, it was fated, for luck is an element of fate. Destiny leaves no choice. Fate gives limited choice, which may be good or bad, but it cannot be averted. What is fated must be, for at no point can there be any turning back." It is when our tests are done at the end of a cycle and we have seen through these tests in truth with strength of heart, the soul is rewarded with immortality. It is then the soul can be at rest and there can be peace within our hearts. As it says in Psalms 116:7, "Return unto your rest, O my soul, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you." 116 equals 8, which equates to immortality on the Egyptian number key, and 7 equals the ethereal soul. The Hindu texts relay this chakra point is where the nectar Amrita drips down from the bindu, symbolized on the mandala, and is split into either a pure form or a poison. However, it is also known as the purification center, so therefore symbolic of redemption. Amrita is a Sanskrit word that literally means immortality and is often referred to in Hindu texts as nectar. The word's earliest occurrence is found in the Rig Veda, where it is also referred to as soma, the drink which bestows immortality upon the gods. The Greeks called this nectar ambrosia, and it carries the same meaning. So we can see this energy point is very important as it determines whether we continue this cycle of the soul and experience immortality and zeptepi, or whether we become accustomed to the taste of the poison and experience death and decay. A bindu dot in a mandala or mantra is symbolic for the manifesting point of that chakra. So we see this chakra is very much tied to the immortality of the soul. And it is not only in the mental projection of our will from the third eye chakra, but the expression of it onto the material plane that grants or denies our immortality. This chakra is also associated with the element of ether, and as such shows the connection between the third eye chakra that is situated completely in the ethereal, and the heart chakra, which is our energy point that is anchored between the ethereal and physical plane. At the bottom of the card, we see the male and female twin souls are depicted about to take their covenant with the divine. The male soul is on the left, and we can see that he is now wearing on his shirt the flowers that were above his head in the magician card. The female twin soul on the right has the blue and white flowers on her shirt, symbolic for her blue dress and white pillar in the high priestess card. These pillars are also represented on the Hierophant card and the Justice card, for again, they are symbolic of the veil between the physical and ethereal planes. And on the Hierophant card, they are showing that the energetic force of the Hierophant stands between the two pillars and represents the conscious acknowledgement of this pledge with the divine before entry to the material plane is granted. On top of the pillars, we see a flourish on each pole. This is representing the ethereal form of the divine male and female twin souls. They are clearly depicted differently to ensure a distinction between them is made. The Hierophant points his two fingers upwards to indicate both the twin souls are answerable only to the divine. However, the two crossed keys show each soul's destinies are also entwined, and they sit in front of the Hierophant, showing that the covenant with each twin soul is also overseen by God. On each side of the keys, we see a disc divided into 4 parts, equating to 8 pieces. 8 represents their immortal soul and shows that their immortality is bound within their covenant to the divine. So now we have 8 shown on each side of the key, representing the immortal soul of the male and female twin souls. However, if we look on the shoes of the Hierophant, we have our third 8. So now we have the 2 immortal twin souls represented, and the third 8 is symbolic of their immortality being connected to the Hierophant and their covenant. We also see the discs can represent 6, which is symbolic of the physical form. And when we add them together, we again get 12. And let us not forget that the Fibonacci sequence also equates to a 12. As mentioned previously, 12 is symbolic of the divine male and female twin soul before they have reunited back with God consciousness. We also see 12 depicted on the front of the Hierophant's garments with the 3 crosses. Together, this equates to 24. If we divide 24 by the Trinity, we get 8 once again. He holds the triple cross, or otherwise known as the papal cross. The 3 bars of the cross represent the Trinity of the divine and the male and female twin soul. We see the Hierophant holds this cross in his hand, symbolic for the covenant he holds between them all. His crown with 18 spikes is depicting that it is through this covenant they will reach the reunification with the divine and transform into the divine number of 9. And finally, we see again in this verse 2 Corinthians 5:10, it states, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may be recompensed for things done in his body, according to what he has done, whether it be good or bad." We can see the covenant represented in this verse by the number 5, and again the infinite cycle of the twin souls and their covenants are represented in the number 10. So now we understand the Hierophant, and that he is not a religious figure, but instead is symbolic of our own individual soul agreements with the divine. So now the divine twin souls have agreed to uphold their covenant with the divine upon being manifest onto the physical plane. In the next video, we will look at the number 6 card, the Lovers. So now the divine twin souls have consciously understood and accepted their destiny and covenant with God consciousness. They are now manifest onto the material plane to begin their journey throughout the cycle of incarnations between both the physical and ethereal planes. The tarot card equivalent to the transformational emergence onto the material plane of the male and female divine twin souls is the Lover's card, which is card number 6. However, when we look to the Fibonacci sequence and golden mean spiral, we can see it is a number 8 in the sequence. If we add all the previous numbers in the Fibonacci sequence up until this number, we get 20. And if we look to the ancient Egyptian number key, we can see that 8 and 20 are situated at the heart chakra. Although there is an obvious connection to the name of this card, the Lovers and the heart, if we look to the Kabbalah tree of life, the Sephirah connected to the heart chakra is Tifereth, which is number 6. So this confirms again that the number 6 and the Lover's card are connected to the heart, and the numbers of the heart chakra are 8 and 20. And if we look at the pathways from 4 Chesed, the Empress, through the heart, Tifereth, to number 8, Hod, we see that the path of the hand, which symbolizes action, is 20. And the path of the eye, which is vision, is 26, which equates to 8. The number 6 is symbolic of the divine twin souls in their physical form. And the number 8 is referring to their immortal soul. And this immortality is directly connected to the weight of the heart. The divine is also connected to them at the heart. And we see this represented by the angel that stands between them. And this is once again showing a third conscious force between God consciousness and the divine twin souls. The number 20 represents our connection from our heart to the Son and the divine. And we see a connection to the number 20 and both the Son and the divine in this verse from Exodus 28. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The Sabbath is a Sunday and a day of rest because it was supposed to be a day we remembered our connection to the Son and the divine through our hearts. Once again, it seems the religious establishment sought to implement themselves into this role also, and thus making it a day of singing songs of praise to some overweight priest who was happy to take your money as he passed around his plate. It is also interesting to note that when God speaks his commandments, he starts at Exodus verse 21. And God spake all these words, saying. This verse is showing us that God speaks through the heart. And the heart of a fetus also beats for the first time on the 20th day of gestation. The angel stands in front of the sun in full illumination, not only showing a connection to the divine with the purple robes, but also that the divine is very much present and supporting them in every way when they are first manifest at the beginning of the cycle. And this is represented in the verse in Genesis 2:15. And the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. When you add the verse 1 and 5 together, you get 6, as well as representing the twin souls in the number 2. At this time, they are in harmony and full consciousness and have the gift of expression and knowledge shown by the symbols of the serpent and the apples on this card. For we see that the divine female twin soul is in front of the tree and has access to this knowledge, and the expression of this knowledge is symbolized by the snake, because we see the snake referenced to speech and expression in both the Kabbalah tree of life and scripture. On the tree of life, the throat chakra is located at the path of the serpent, and in scripture the serpent speaks to them about eating the divine fruit of knowledge in Genesis 3:5. For God doth know in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. 3 and 5 equals 8, the immortal soul, and the number 8 is also connected to the heart chakra. So now we understand that the serpent and tree of apples are symbolic for the expressed intellect of the female twin soul. However, the divine male twin soul has his divine knowledge represented by the tree with the 12 flames. The fires are representing his divinity illuminated within him, as they are at the height of consciousness and have full access to their divinity. However, in the background, we can see a steep mountain has been depicted. This is to denote that this will not be a continuous cycle of never-ending plains, but one of changes. The mountain is represented in a phallic way, as it is the male that will forget his divinity first and force Lilith from the garden as they once again descend in consciousness throughout this cycle. When consciousness leaves them and they forget their divinity, they are no longer welcome in the garden, and we see this in Genesis 3:24. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way of the tree of life. 2 and 4 equals 6, and 3 is the Trinity. The cherubim guarding the way of the tree of life is symbolic for man descending into lower consciousness, and our worthiness of divine knowledge leaves us and we are denied of it. As we saw previously on the Kabbalah Tree of Life, the number 6 Lover's card equates to the Sephirah number 6, called Tifereth. This Sephirah is connected to the heart chakra, and in the Hindu tradition, this is known as the Anahata chakra. Its symbol is often shown as a green lotus with 12 flower petals, and in the middle of the lotus is a hexagram, which also represents the number 6. This hexagram is symbolic for the upper ethereal forces and the lower energetic forces of the earthly plane merging within the heart. As discussed in previous videos, the energy point of the heart is the only energy center in our ethereal body that is anchored in both the physical and ethereal planes. This is where our lower 3 chakras and higher 3 chakras meet, and it is not surprising that the name of this chakra is equated to a sound known as the Anahata Nada, the unmade sound. This is a sound not made in the realms of where we dwell. It is the unknown sound of the universe, the primal sound of energy itself. Our ethereal heart is the merging point or vortex of the higher and lower realms. The Hindu called this hexagram within this chakra a Shatkona. It is a symbol used in Hindu yantra that represents the union of Purusha, the supreme being, symbolic of the ethereal and divine forces, and Prakriti, which is symbolic of Mother Nature and the causal matter influenced by the ethereal and upper realms. In Tibetan Buddhism, the heart wheel is circular, white, and has 8 petals or channels that reach downwards. It is said these channels divide into 3, the mind wheel, speech wheel, and body wheel. They then go to the 24 places in the body. They then divide into 3 again, and then into 1,000, producing 72,000 channels known as the nadi, which spread out throughout the whole body. It is interesting in these numbers from Tibetan Buddhism that we see a connection to the number 8. The channels from the heart are said to go into 24 places, 2 and 4 are 6, and if we divided 24 by the Trinity, we get 8. So we are seeing a connection to the number 6 and 8 once again. Therefore, it is not surprising that on the Kabbalah Tree of Life that the middle Sephirah, Tifereth, also represents the center where the upper and lower forces meet. Kabbalists say that Tifereth is somewhat of a converting Sephirah between form, Yesod, and the ethereal forces of Ketha. Tifereth is also related to the sun and the astrological sign of Leo, and in Christian Kabbalah, Tifereth is especially associated with Jesus, who they call God the Son, as opposed to Ketha, who is referred to as God the Father. They say this is because in Tifereth, the divine force sacrifices itself, transmuting into the forces of energy and matter, in order that creation might come to be. They also say that it is this Sephirah where God becomes a mortal man. So what these Kabbalists are clearly showing is how they are relating these energies that are manifesting our creation from the projected mental universe, God consciousness, through the sun onto the material plane. And as Hermetics shows us, with the correspondence of the mental, spiritual, and physical planes, there are no clearly defined boundaries, and all the planes merge into one another. The heart is where your ethereal and foundational forces merge, and you are anchored onto this plane. And the sun is the energetic connection that anchors the soul here by the heart, projected through God's mind. However, as the tree of life and Eastern philosophies show, you must pass into the ethereal heart and relinquish your bondage to the physical plane to move up into the ethereal and more conscious energy points within you. There is a Norse goddess known as Sin, and she was known as the one who guarded the gates and refused entry to those who were not deemed worthy. In chapter 35 of the Prose Edda book, Sin is listed as 11th of 16 Aesir. It is said that she guards the doors of the hall and shuts them against those who are not to enter. Her name is also connected to a saying where a denial, sin, is made when one says no. So we can see in the Norse mythology, it is the goddess Sin who guards the doors to the halls or path of Gimel. For it is when we work against the heart, we are creating sin or weight in our heart. And if we add the numbers of the chapter together, 3 and 5, it equals 8. In Sufism, the Qalb is called the heart of a mystic, which is caught between the downward pull of the lower nafs and the upward pull of the spirit of Allah, and thus can be blackened by sin. So once again, we see the heart connected to the area of upper and lower forces. This is the end of part 1 of number 7 in the Mystery Teachings series. The entire cornerstone of the ancient Egyptian belief system was related to the heart, and everything was focused on preparing for a time when the divine light would return and their hearts would be weighed against this light. The weighing of the heart ceremony was not a ritual enacted because their biological container had expired. They knew the truth of their divinity and their true ethereal forms, and as such prepared their souls and their heart for this coming light, not their physical bodies or their physical heart, which were only symbolic. The physical heart, like the pineal gland, are physical extensions of energy points within our ethereal bodies. Our ethereal body is who we are first and foremost. It is the form in which we were first created, and as such, it is with the ethereal body that we feel changes in vibrations or resonance first. These changes are then relayed to certain physical parts of our body that relate to these energy points. So for example, when sun gazing, you may feel a sensation behind your forehead, and your first thought is that it must be your pineal gland. However, what you are experiencing is your pineal gland reacting to a resonance from your third eye chakra, which is then being felt in the physical extension of that energy point. The correct way to perceive yourself is as an ethereal being, for this is who you are, and this is what the establishment have tried to hide from the masses, to keep them locked down into a physical perception of themselves. The establishment have even gone as far to create departments to program the reality of the masses into one of physicality, using agencies like science, which they then disguise as education, when in fact it is merely programming. Most people wouldn't know that the Big Bang Theory was postulated by a Catholic priest, and which establishment has so much to lose if humanity woke up to the fact they are ethereal and immortal, and they are only responsible to their own souls and God for their immortality. Do you think we would need crime control and government to live as decent beings upon this planet if that truth were known? I think not. So what this information is showing us is the truth of who we are, and that is ethereal beings with a physical extension. And we need not fear death of our physical extension, but instead pay attention to the cycle of death and resurrection of our souls. If we look to the Aramaic Bible in verse Matthew 10:28. And you shall not be afraid of those who kill the body, that are not able to kill the soul. Rather be afraid of him who can destroy soul and body in Gehenna. In other translations, the religious institutions have equated Gehenna to hell. However, what this is speaking of is the soul being wiped from existence, as the ancient Egyptians believed happened if you were not carrying the weight of enough light within your heart. The love we have collected throughout our lifetimes is an energy that can be measured by the Creator. And when this divine light returns, we will be measured against the light of the Creator to see if we are worthy of our immortality. And we see this verse is number 10:28, which is reduced to 10:10, showing the infinite cycle of the twin souls. In this verse from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they speak of the heart and truth leading them back to heaven and their godlike divinity. It states, "May the hearts of gods lead him in his exalted state into heaven among the gods who appear in visible forms. If any god or any goddess attack Osiris Ani, whose word is truth, when he setteth out, the ancestor of the year who liveth upon hearts, Osiris, shall eat him when cometh forth from Abydos, and the ancestors of Ra shall reckon with him, and the ancestors of light shall reckon with him." This is showing that those who live and speak in truth will once again experience a time when they walk as gods on this earth, and that those who do live in truth are protected and guided by the gods. However, although our paths are destined, we have free will to take a higher or lower path and see if we meet our tests through strength of character and heart, or whether we give in to the temptation of the lower path and remain in bondage to the physical plane. We see this lower path symbolized in the other card connected to the number 6 Lovers card, and that is the Devil card, which is card number 15. The Devil card is symbolic of our bondage to the physical plane, when we descend into lower consciousness. When we forget our divinity, we forget that we are ethereal, and instead only think of ourselves as finite and physical. This is why we see the chains around the necks of the divine twin souls, for they are trapped in the physical perception of themselves and a victim of the devil. In Daniel 5:20, it shows the heart is connected to his covenant in this verse, but it could not override his mind in lower consciousness. It states, "But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him." Showing that when the mind refused the heart, his divinity remained elusive to him. And we see that the number 5 is symbolic of the covenant, and 20 shows the connection to the divine, which measures his worthiness through his heart. We also see a connection to the heart and the sun with the ancient Maya, who willingly sacrificed their hearts to the sun. Once again, some people seem to be offended by this practice and look down on the Maya due to these rituals. But what they don't understand is that the Maya knew they were ethereal and that their soul would return again, so they did not fear death. These rituals were performed because they believed a time of higher consciousness could be brought back through the sacrificing of the heart. We also see in some of the cultures that pain and sacrifice are often a way to strengthen the heart of a warrior. When a person deals honorably with pain and sacrifice, this increases the light within their heart. In some Native American tribes, there was a ceremony known as the sun dance, and this was a ceremony only the bravest and most honorable warrior could partake in. This warrior was then hung on hooks to take the pain of the people in his village. They believed in doing this, he not only lightened his own heart, but their hearts too. And in Greek mythology, there is a story about a centaur named Chiron, and this story is also describing the strength of heart that comes through pain. Chiron embodies the compassion and humility pain can bring to a person, but in turn strengthens their heart also. This is why it takes strength of heart to return to the higher consciousness of an immortal soul. And we can see this depicted on the strength card, which is card number 8, symbolic for immortality, where the woman has closed the lion's jaws with strength of heart and not violence. We can also see this relayed in the story of Daniel and the lions. Daniel 6:16. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spoke and said, Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Daniel 6:20. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice to Daniel. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God, whom you serve continually, able to deliver you from the lions? Daniel 6:21. Then said Daniel to the king, O king, live forever. Daniel 6:22. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocence was found in me, and also before you, O king, I have done no hurt. Daniel 6:23. Then the king, exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found on him, because he believed in his God. The verses here in Daniel 6 are showing that when Daniel believes in his divinity and is no longer trapped in the illusion of bondage to the physical body, in his darkest hour he is rewarded with the truth of his divinity and immortality. This is relayed to him by his angel, which is symbolic for his ethereal self. Therefore, the lions, knowing Daniel's understanding of his immortality, see no reason to kill him. This is what the strength card number 8 is once again symbolic for. And on the tree of life, the Sephirah Hod number 8 is directly connected to the strength card, and is said to be symbolic of, instead of conquering an obstacle in one's path, to rather overcome it by subduing oneself to the obstacle. And we see that the Sephiroth of the heart is connected to the Sephiroth of strength through the path of vision. This is symbolic in the way one perceives themselves. The story of Daniel shows that his trust in himself, of who he really was actually his trust in God, and he was rewarded as such for his courage with immortality. And finally, in Proverbs 10:20, we see that the heart weighted in sin is of little value compared to the soul that lives in truth. The tongue of the just is as choice silver. The heart of the wicked is little worth. Once again, 20 is connected to the heart, and 10 is symbolizing the covenant of the divine twin souls and the infinite cycle of the souls. So now we have an understanding for the divine twin souls in their physical form on the material plane through the Lover's card. So let us now look to the next card that is symbolic of our ethereal form and the ethereal realm, which is card number 7, the Chariot.